There is a jar of meat that can kill you and you will not smell a thing. The lid won't bulge. The meat won't go gray. Open it up, and it looks exactly like the jar sitting next to it. That's perfectly fine. You could set it on the table, and nobody at that table would know. 4 million people just watched a video showing them how to make that jar. A woman filling pork and bacon into glass, packed tight, the fat marbling right up against the side. Beautiful work. She says she learned it during the war in her country, when there was no refrigerator and no power, and you either put the meat up or you lost it. She isn't lying to you, friend. What she can't tell you, what nobody can tell you from the other side of a screen, is about the jars that didn't happen to have anything in them. Now picture the biggest pot in your kitchen, the lid of it. There's one thing I want you to look for, and you can do it in your head right now. A little metal weight sitting loose on top of a stem, the kind you could lift off with 2 fingers, or a round dial with a needle in it. That one piece of metal is the whole difference. It's the difference between meat that keeps a year on a shelf with no freezer and no electricity, and the jar I just described. And in 40 years, I never once heard anybody point at it. I'm Ray. I spent those 40 years in a grocery store in southern Ohio. Started at 18 hauling cases off a truck in the back. Ended up running the place. We closed in 2004 when a chain opened 4 miles out on the highway, and that was that. Before the store, I grew up on my folks' farm. My mother canned. My grandmother canned. I've done it myself more falls than I can count, and I stood in that store and sold the jars, the lids, the rings, the funnels, and the pots. I'm not a chemist. I'm not your doctor. I'm a man who has done this with his own hands. I'm going to walk you through the whole thing the way it was walked through for me. By hand, by ear, by what you can see and hear from across the kitchen. And if you don't have that pot yet, stay with me anyway. Because the reason it matters is the same reason people get hurt. And by the end, you'll know what to look for on a shelf. Let me start with the 2 pots, because this is where it goes wrong before anybody touches a piece of meat. There is a pot for cooking and there is a pot for canning, and they look enough alike in a store aisle that people bring the wrong one home all the time. The cooking one is what your daughter has on her counter. Does a roast in 40 minutes. Wonderful thing, and I've got nothing bad to say about it for cooking. The canning one is bigger, heavier. There's a rack that sits in the bottom so the jars don't touch metal. And on the lid, that weight or that dial. Pick both lids up and you'll feel it. The canner lid has weight in your hand. There's a thick rubber gasket around the rim, and when you set it down, it settles instead of clicking. And the weight on top is loose. That's the thing. It's supposed to be loose. It sits on a little post, and when that pot gets going, the weight rocks and jumps and hisses and makes a racket you can hear from the next room. That noise is how you know it's working. My mother could tell from the porch whether her canner was running right. If the lid clamps down tight and holds everything in with no weight jumping, that's a cooker. Different animal, different job. Now the meat. You want it fresh and you want it cold. If it's been in the freezer, thaw it in the refrigerator until there's no ice left in it at all. Press your thumb into the thickest part, and if there's a hard spot in the middle, it isn't ready. Once it's thawed, don't let it sit. 2 days at the outside, and I'd rather it be 1. Trim it. Take the heavy fat off. I know, fat is flavor, and I'm not telling you to strip it bare, but too much fat in the jar climbs up the glass and gets on the rim, and grease on a rim is how you lose a seal. Take the big pieces off and leave the rest. Cut it into strips or chunks that'll stand up in the jar. Not so big they wedge, not so small they pack into a brick. The liquid has to be able to move down through them. Now, hot pack or raw pack, you'll hear both. Raw pack is what it sounds like. Meat goes in cold and the canner cooks it. Hot pack means you brown it or simmer it first, then jar it hot. Takes more of your morning. I do it anyway most times, and here's why. Meat shrinks when it cooks. Pack it raw and tight and it pulls away from itself in the jar, and you end up with meat at the bottom and a big empty space up top. Hot pack, most of that shrinking already happened. So what goes in is close to what comes out. Either one works. The chart has different times for each, and that matters. I'll come back to the chart. Get your jars hot before the meat goes in. Not boiling, hot. Run them through the dishwasher and leave them in there, or set them in a sink of hot water. Cold glass and hot meat is how a jar cracks on you, and it'll crack right when you're feeling good about the morning. Pack the meat loose, fingers, or the back of a spoon. You're not stuffing a suitcase. Push it down enough that it isn't bridging across the middle, and stop. Leave room at the top, about the width of your thumb down from the rim, and the chart will tell you exactly for what you're doing. That empty space is where the air goes so it can be driven out. Don't leave enough, and the food swells up over the rim, and there goes your seal. Add liquid if the chart calls for it. Broth or water, poured slow. Then run a butter knife or a chopstick down the inside of the glass and around a few times. You'll see bubbles come up. Those are air pockets hiding behind the meat, and if you leave them, the jar ends up with less vacuum than it should have. Now the rim, and this is the step people skip. Clean cloth, wet, all the way around the top of that jar, every bit of it. Then run your finger over it. If it feels slick, wipe it again with a little vinegar on the cloth. Fat on a rim is invisible, and it will cost you the jar. Your finger finds what your eye missed. Lid on, flat side down. Then the ring, and here's where I want you paying attention, because it goes against everything your hands want to do. Turn the ring down until you feel it catch, then stop. Don't crank it. Don't put a rag on it for grip. Don't give it that last quarter turn to be sure. The air inside that jar has to get out during processing. That's the point of the whole exercise. Seal it up tight ahead of time, and the pressure builds inside the glass with nowhere to go, and you either buckle the lid or you lose the jar. Fingertip tight, they call it. I say turn it till it catches and take your hand away. Jars into the canner, up on the rack, not touching the bottom, not touching each other. Water in the bottom, a couple, 3 inches, whatever your canner calls for. This is not the water bath your grandmother used for pickles. The jars aren't swimming. They're standing in a shallow puddle, and it's the steam that does the work, not the water. Lid on, locked down, burner up high. Now you watch that vent. In a few minutes, steam starts coming out. At first it sputters, puffs and stops and puffs again. There's still air mixed in with it. What you're waiting for is one steady plume, a single funnel of steam coming out continuous, no breaks in it. When you see that, look at the clock and let it run exactly that way for 10 full minutes. 10, not 2, not until it looks about right. 10 on a timer, and if it breaks up in the middle, you start the 10 over. I know that feels like waste. It isn't. That's the canner driving every last bit of air out of itself. Air and steam don't carry heat the same, and if air is trapped in there with your jars, the gauge tells you a story that isn't true. The needle reads where it ought to be, and the temperature inside isn't there. That's the most skipped step in the whole business, and it's the one that fools you, because everything after it looks correct. Vented, now the weight goes on. Or you close the petcock if you've got a dial gauge. Pressure comes up over the next few minutes. On a weighted canner, you'll know because the weight starts to rock. It jiggles, then settles into a rhythm. Rock, hiss, pause, rock. My mother had hers running at a pace you could almost keep time to. That's your clock starting, not when you turn the burner on, not when the steam came out. When the weight starts rocking, that's minute one, and your only job for the next while is holding that rhythm steady. Too much heat and it rocks hard and constant, and you'll boil the liquid right out of the jars. You'll open the canner and find them half empty. Too little heat and it stops rocking, and every second it isn't rocking is a second that doesn't count. And if it does drop off, you walk away, come back, it's quiet. You don't get to guess, and you don't get to add a few minutes on the end. You bring it back up, and you start the entire time over from zero. That's the rule. It's an expensive rule. It's also why you don't leave the kitchen. You settle into it. Small moves on the burner. After a batch or two, your ear does it without you thinking about it. Now, how long? This is the one place I'm going to send you to a piece of paper instead of telling you myself, and I want to explain why. The time changes with the meat, with hot pack or raw, with the size of your jars. And the pressure changes with how high up you live, because water boils cooler the higher you go, and your canner is fighting that the whole time. There's a tested chart for every one of those combinations. USDA put it in the Complete Guide to Home Canning, and the current one is the 2015 revision. The National Center for Home Food Preservation at the University of Georgia has all of it free. A man on a screen reciting an hour and a half from memory is a man who might be thinking of quarts while you're holding pints. Look it up. It's one page. Write it on a card, tape it inside your cabinet door, and you'll never look it up again. And here's the harder version of the same thing. If you can't find a tested time for what you're trying to put up, some mixture, some family recipe, something you thought of, then there isn't one. You can't work it out at home. Nobody can. That's not me being careful. That's the honest limit of what a kitchen can determine. Time's up. Burner off. And now the hardest part of the day, which is doing nothing. Leave it alone. Don't run water over it. Don't carry it out to the porch. Don't lift that weight to let the pressure down quick. The canner is still working while it comes down. That cooling is part of the process, not something that happens after it. Force it down fast and liquid siphons right out of your jars. You'll open it up and find them half full with the meat sitting up out of the broth. You're waiting for zero. On a weighted canner that's 30 to 45 minutes, and you let it get there on its own. Then take the weight off and wait another 10 minutes before you touch the lid. Then open it away from your face. There's still heat in there, and it will find your wrist. And leave the jars sitting in the canner another 10 minutes before you lift them out. That last wait is what keeps the liquid in the jars instead of on your rack. Then out with a lifter, straight up, no tilting. Onto a towel on the counter with a little space between them. Not on bare stone, not in a draft, not by an open window. And leave them. Sometime in the next hour or two, you'll hear them. A little metallic pop, one at a time, from across the kitchen. That's the lid pulling down. Best sound in this whole business, and I've never gotten tired of it. Give them a full day, then take the rings off and check. Press the middle of each lid. If it gives and springs back, that one didn't seal. Set it aside, then tap it. Take a spoon and tap the center. A sealed jar rings, sharp, clean, high. An unsealed one thuds, dull and flat. Hear them back to back once, and you'll never confuse them again. Then pick it up by the edges of the lid, careful, an inch off the counter. A good seal holds the whole weight of the jar. The ones that didn't seal aren't ruined. Refrigerate them and eat them this week, or run them through again with a brand new lid and a full time. New lid. The old one's sealing compound already took its impression and won't take another. Wipe the good jars down, label them with what's in there and the date, and put them somewhere cool and dark. One more thing, and almost nobody does it anymore, and it costs you 10 minutes. Before you eat home-canned meat, put it in a saucepan and boil it. Not warm it through. Boil it. Big rolling bubbles breaking all over the top. 10 minutes if you're down low. Higher up, add a minute for every 1,000 feet above the first 1,000. Same pan you were going to heat it in anyway. Cost you nothing but the clock. Everything before that was about doing the process right. That 10 minutes is what's there in case something went wrong that you couldn't see, which brings me to what I've been building toward. Every bit of what I just told you, you could have learned standing next to your grandmother. Watch the steam, listen to the weight, feel the ring catch, tap the lid, hands and ears and eyes. Here are the two numbers, and I've gone this whole way without giving you a single one. Down at sea level, water boils at 212. What lives in that jar of meat needs 240 to die. That's the whole thing. 28 degrees. Meat is what they call a low-acid food. There's no acid in it to speak of. Nothing like a pickle or a tomato or a jar of jam. Acid holds this bug back. Meat hasn't got any, so temperature has to do all of it, and you cannot get to 240 in a pot of boiling water. It isn't a matter of boiling longer or boiling harder. Water tops out, it hits its boil and turns to steam, and it will not go higher no matter what you do to it. 2 hours, 6 hours, all day long. Same temperature the whole time. The only way a home kitchen gets to 240 is by trapping that steam and putting it under pressure. That's what the weight on the lid is doing. That is the entire reason it exists. Now, about your grandmother. She very likely did put up green beans and chicken in a water bath, hours at a time, and her family ate it and was fine. Mine did some of that too. Nobody was lying to her. Nobody knew. Boiling was boiling, and it killed everything anybody had ever heard of. It was a good while before anybody worked out that there are strains of this thing whose spores can sit in boiling water for hours and walk out alive. The women doing it were doing exactly what every authority told them was correct. That is not on them, and it is not on you either. Let me give you two more, because the old mistake has new clothes on it now. The first is the electric pressure cooker, the one on your daughter's counter. Some of them come in a box with canning printed right on the front. USDA's position is that these don't do it, not enough volume. They come up to heat fast and they come down fast, and that heat up and cool down is part of the time the tested charts are counting on. Run the same number of minutes in a small electric pot and the food has spent less total time hot than the chart intended. Same error as the water bath, wearing a modern coat. The display shows a number. The number matches the chart. And what happened inside that pot is not what happened inside the canner they tested. The second is oven canning. Jars of meat set in a hot oven for a couple of hours. Dry heat doesn't move into a jar the way pressurized steam does. The inside of that jar never gets where the oven is. Think about a roast. You set the oven to 325. You do not cook the roast to 325. And canning jars aren't made for dry heat at all. They can crack and they can break apart on you when you go to take them out. Neither of those is anybody trying to hurt you. Both are somebody who found a way that seemed to work. And it did work, the times they did it. So here's where all of this has been pointed. The mistake was never the water bath. It isn't the electric pot or the oven either. Those are the shapes it takes. The mistake is that you were taught correctly by good people your whole life that your senses are the final check on food, and they are. On everything else in that kitchen, they're the best tool you own, and I'd put an old cook's nose up against a laboratory most days of the week. This is the one place it's switched off. Not that it gives you a wrong answer. It gives you no answer. You could stand over that jar for an hour with everything you know and come away with nothing, and every instinct you've got will be telling you that you'd be able to tell. And that is why the CDC's position since 2013 is that if there's reason to think a home-canned food might have this in it, you throw it out. Don't sample it to check. Don't feed a little to the dog. Throw it out. And once you know that, all the rest of it makes sense. That's why there's a chart instead of a judgment call. That's why you vent the full 10 minutes even though it feels like waste. That's why you start the clock over from 0 instead of splitting the difference. That's why you don't rush the cooling and don't crank the ring. Not because you'd notice if you got it wrong, because you wouldn't. So here's the rule to carry out of here, and it's good well past this jar. When somebody hands you a way of putting food up, ask them one question. How would I know if it went wrong? If there's an answer, it smells sour, it goes soft, mold shows, the brine clouds, then your senses are still on the job and you've got some margin for error. If there's no answer, then the time and the temperature aren't a suggestion. They're the only thing standing between you and what comes next. And that's when you go find the tested chart instead of the video. That woman filling jars got her family through a war. She did nothing wrong by her own lights. She just can't tell you about the jars that didn't happen to have anything in them. Go look at that lid. If there's a weight on it, you're ready. Pull the chart, pick a Saturday, do a small batch of something you like, and stand there and listen to it rock. If there isn't, that's the one piece you're missing. And it's the cheapest insurance in the house. That is not on you. Nobody told you. Read the front, then read the chart.